Okay, fantastic. Okay, I should be there.
This is Ron Whittingham, and I'm co-owner of Megan Financial, an independent retirement and financial services firm here in Chicago. We've built our business on playing the long game, teaching financial literacy.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, ABC. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's a beautiful day.
Facebook sounds good for both of you.
Okay, fantastic.
1090. We're Megan Financial,
Oh,
and we're your partners.
all right, here, let's go.
Or visit us at megent.com.
Securities and advisory services.
Okay. Linear Bob, haven't seen you in a minute. It's good to see you.
Ownership from any other named entity. The views of the
Hold
people
this up.
general in nature and provided for informational use only. The views are not necessarily those of Secure Advisors LLC. They should not be considered as specific investment or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Keep in mind that investing involves risk, including cost of principal. Investment decisions should be based upon an individual's own goals, horizon, and tolerance for risk. Consult your investment or tax professional regarding your unique situation.
Hey, okay. Woo, honey.
Streaming Chicago's progressive talk.
These allergies have gotten me this time. And you know, I haven't been able to find Claritin
Sometimes
D.
I just cannot believe all the storms
Okay.
we've gone through here.
It's like you can find
I will
Claritin.
see if I,
Hope that we'll be able to
Do you
leave
have
this
it
house
out there?
I got some stuff in Morocco. I'll see if I have some more of it that I can get to you.
Honey, I need it because I am right now. I'm miserable. As soon as I get off there, I'm gonna go try and find some more Claritin
We
D.
should make an emergency
I mean,
communication.
I am
That way
like
we're
my
ready to
eyes
share.
hurt.
At my dorm, we have emergency kits for
I mean, they hurt, and
earthquakes
you know, and you're
wildfires,
right.
but
When you go
I'm sure there's something more
overseas,
local. I can
I
send you
mean,
a link.
what the medicines they use just have they're much more efficacious.
It's just better.
They get right into your system.
Protect your legacy.
You know, when you get the shots, they give you, you know, if you need a steroid, everybody, it's a shot.
Start your emergency
So it
preparedness
gets
plan
right
today.
there.
Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad
And,
Council.
you know, and there are a lot of our foods, everybody, Michael, Ann, and Dave, and Osa, Robert, that other that countries refuse to
a
sell
message that mentions Social Security
because they're
immediate
so
action.
shot
Did
up
the
with so
caller know
many
your Social
chemicals
Security
and
number
medicines.
or other personal information?
People don't like
and tell
that.
you that your Social Security number
And
had
you
been
see
used in
it
connection
play
with a
out in
crime?
our health.
Did you
in our
feel worried
healthcare
that your
outcomes.
Social Security number might be
So,
suspended?
oh,
Your bank account
man.
might be
I
frozen
mean,
or
when
seized,
when
or
I
you
say
could be arrested?
miserable,
That is not the Social
Pastor, right
Security
now, I am
Administration.
miserable.
Social Security will not threaten you, demand
You know,
personal
I don't use that
information, or
lightly.
instant
because
payment.
I'm like, I can
Email
handle
or
it
text you pictures or
This-
documents.
Yeah,
with
you're
a
true.
government
I'm
official's name
miserable.
to gain your trust.
right now.
Social Security does not accept payments
So
by
I'm
gift
gonna
card,
go. I'm gonna go. In
prepaid
fact, I
debit
have to go to
card,
another
internet
area to try and
currency,
find
or
Claritin.
by
I couldn't
mailing
find
cash.
Claritin D. I could find
Criminals use
Claritin,
these forms of
but
payment
not
because they are
Claritin
hard
D.
to trace. Do not be
And Dr.
fooled.
Arnold
Hang
told
up.
me yesterday
Ignore
to get
them.
Claritin
Report this
D.
criminal
He said
activity to
you'll
the
have a
Social
much better
Security
outcome.
Administration
You know, I'm not
Office
gonna
of the
just
Inspector
take this
General
and then take
at
that. No, I'm looking for this.
oig.ssa.gov.
Whatever I need to find, I'll find it. But oh, it's life. It's like,
1
but I'm
minute.
glad to hear your voice.
This
I'm
message
sorry,
is from
Alex.
U.S.
You
Department
said
of
we're under a
Veterans
minute.
Affairs.
We're inside of a minute.
1 minute, yes.
Okay,
Tough
thank
time or
you.
thinking
I'm
about
sorry, hon.
suicide,
I apologize.
you're not
I
alone.
never want to talk over
And
you.
there's hope.
You're okay. No worries.
VG's Veterans Crisis Line is full of responders who listen and help. Many are veterans or have veteran family members and friends, so they're prepared to address your challenges. After calling, you'll be connected to the next available crisis line responder.
Man, I'm constantly
That person
wiping
may
my
ask,
eyes.
are
Oh,
you thinking of suicide?
oh,
What plan
I
can we put
mean,
in place to keep you safe
my
today?
eyes actually
If you
burn.
choose, the responder will
But
share
I'm
your
excited
name
about
and personal
Sunday.
information with your local
I'm
suicide
excited
prevention
about that.
coordinator. We'll connect you to local VA assistance
And
and resources.
I'm very
Don't
excited
wait.
about that.
Dial 988, then press
So
10 seconds.
if you want to make any announcements, you can. If you don't, that's fine too. Okay.
Stand by.
We won't send anything
Okay.
until after.
I'll be.
Chicago's progressive
And then
talk
next
from
week
TuneIn.
we can talk.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world. I am
Hey everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It's August already, everybody. Tuesday, August 1st, 2023. It is a joy to be with you on WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 radio. the voice of progressive Minnesota. I've got to get Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. She was at the Rainbow Push convention. She said, just call my communications people. I'd love to come on. I'm going to get her on. Have such admiration for her. It's a joy to be with you today. Let's talk about the more than $20 billion in debt that Russia has canceled with African nations. Now, the likelihood they knew was great that they were not going to be able to return that money, but it's significant. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, they don't cancel those debts. Indeed, those debts continue to entrench and retrench the global South, Africa, India, and South and Central America into debt. So it is significant, but what does it mean? What does it mean? What will come up in the exchange? As you recall, much of, I think at least 90% of Cuban debt was canceled by the Russians in exchange for their oil. There was a massive finding of oil found more than 10 years ago, just off of the coast of Cuba, that will enable them to join OPEC. They will be one of the 20 largest, they will be in the top 20 largest oil producing nations on earth. And when that happened, I said, now watch us open the door to Cuba. We're going to work. We did it just after that. Honey, it is about the money. You better know that. And then, of course, a tribute to Sinead O'Connor. Many of us don't know just how progressive she was. And in fact, she redid Mahalia Jackson's famed Troubles of the World and dedicated it to Black Lives Matter. But as an Irish Republican, as someone who fought the monarchy overseas, she's not like the Irish community that we see in the United States, who become part of the establishment. As an Irish Republican, she is not part of the establishment. They are the Blacks of Europe. There's a wonderful movie that talks about that, The Commitments, in which you see one of the main characters wearing a Jesse Jackson 88 presidential t-shirt. He got a lot of support from over there. She's part of that tradition. We're going to be talking about that, talking about her and her life and her tremendous legacy with John Nichols. So let's get right to it. What about the forgiveness of that debt? And what about the Trump indictment? Fonnie Willis, the Atlanta prosecutor, is saying, hey, we need to put barriers around the courthouse. What do you think is going to happen there? Got a lot to talk about on the Santita Jackson Show, and of course, infection prevention with Dr. Shanina Knighton. So let's get right to it, everybody, on the Santita Jackson Show. Did you get up like early in the morning? I'm already up anyway. But of course, I wanted to see what was going to happen with our ladies at the FIFA World Cup, the Women's World Cup soccer match. Now, I tell you what, the American team barely got by. It was 0-0. You have to score a certain amount of points in your game in order to advance into the top group into the next round. America squeaked by. And so they are. I mean, they're giving us some nail biters, everybody, but they did get on through. So, God bless them, everybody. The endless heat wave, starting with the headlines in the southern U.S., will continue this week. What to expect, according to the Washington Post. Record heat is forecast in Dallas, Houston, New Orleans. The heat wave is entering its third month, and it's getting hotter along the Gulf Coast. Around the globe, July was packed with weather anomalies. It provided a glimpse of the unforeseen consequences that will come as the world goes hotter, according to scientists. Indeed, since they started measuring temperatures, we found that globally, July was the hottest month ever. Donald Trump's fundraising committees are burning through cash, everybody. They had more than $100 million at the beginning of the year, but they are down to 4. His joint fundraising committee raised $53.9 million over the first 6 months of the year, but spent more than $52 million. New disclosures show. It means that the former president is raising more money than his rivals for the Republican nomination. But mounting legal bills are putting a strain on his campaign's hands. Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens, had been battling cancer for at least 6 years. And of course, we love the work that he did. And of course, with his funhouse, with his playhouse, he had a rainbow cast, if you will. Of course, many of us remember Larry Fishburne on there, but he made efforts to really make his cast look like the world, look like America. He made his transition. Pee Wee Herman, Peter Pan figures, that's what they call him, for the 1980s. Gleeful, impish, children's TV. A lot of adults were into him. I thought he was fantastic. And he made that transition. He was 70 years of age. And Angus Cloud, the Euphoria actor, only 25 years of age, made his transition. The kind-hearted high school drug dealer on the HBO drama series Euphoria. Well, he buried his father last week, and he had been struggling with his own mental health, according to his family. He was just 25 years of age, and as I shared with you at the top of the show, the U.S. narrowly advanced to the knockout stage of the Women's World Cup. The U.S. tied 0-0 with Portugal and New Zealand. It was enough to secure second place in Group B. The Netherlands came out on top after a 7-0 dismantling of Vietnam. What's next? The U.S. will play the winner of Group G, most likely Sweden, which is a really strong team, on Sunday at 5 a.m. In fact, Sweden beat them the last time. 5 a.m. on Sunday. You don't want to miss it. You can see it on Fox, Telemundo, or Universe. And the National Institutes of Health will study potential long COVID treatments, everybody. And in Chicago, it's going to be a beautiful day, although partly cloudy. 80 degrees will be the high. In Minneapolis, St. Paul, 87 degrees, partly cloudy. The Netherlands, 6, Vietnam, well, actually 7, and Vietnam 0. And today, China will be playing England, and Haiti will be playing Denmark. You're not pulling for Haiti. Love y'all. Major League Baseball, the Twins will be playing the Cardinals. The White Sox will be playing the Rangers, and the Cincinnati team was triumphant over Chicago. Chicago Cubs 6-5 in the WNBA. The Lynx will be playing the Sun today at 6 p.m. And those are the headlines on the Santita Jackson Show. Of course, we have got Pastor Stephen Thurston from New Covenant Missionary Baptist Church. And of course, his Facebook Live service is, well, it's really a talk. It's really a talk. That's what you're supposed to do with your pastor, 3 p.m. Central. That's what you do. When I've had the tough times in my life, I said, wow, my Aunt Lucille Conway Loman, whom you remember, said, no, that's what the pastor's for. You go to your pastor when you're really having a tough time. I said, oh, wow, I get it. It's wonderful hearing your voice, my dear friend and brother, beloved.
Yes, ma'am. Likewise. Always glad to be here with your morning stars and everybody that's so faithful to tune in and catch what you're saying and how you're enlightening us and informing us. And today, Santita, I want to remind everybody one simple thing. Calm down. Just calm down. Listen, all of us feel and experience both positive and negative emotions on a daily basis. But for some of us, though, feeling these emotions can seem overwhelming, like a wild roller coaster ride. And when we look at emotion from an etymological sense, we recognize that our emotions move us. The ancients believed that our emotions move our behavior. But in our modern context, it suggested that our emotions motivate our behavior. And they energize us to do things by sending chemical signals to various parts of our body to prepare us for action. Whether subtle or intense, conscious or unconscious, overt or covert, all emotions have one of three motivations: to approach, to avoid, or to attack. And this is why emotional regulation is an important skill set for us to employ as mature adults. As adults, we're expected to be able to manage our emotions in a manner that's socially acceptable. Now, it's when emotional control fails that people end up on YouTube, end up on the news, because they end up saying or doing things that they later regret, wishing that they've been able to keep their emotions in check. Well, what makes controlling our emotions so difficult at times? Why do people go viral for the crazy things or the mean things that they say and do? Well, there are a couple of factors to consider. One is negative beliefs about emotions, that they're bad or that they're something that we aren't able to control. Second, and I think more importantly, a lack of emotional regulation skills and strategies. Our ability to self-regulate has its roots in our childhood developmental years. And the sad reality is that we've all seen adults who still throw tantrums because as children, they weren't taught how to tolerate uncomfortable experiences. And we've been told to think before we act. But the harsh truth is that we haven't been taught how to think before we act. Most parents, teachers, and other adults, they kind of simply expected that we grow out of the tantrum phase without learning concrete strategies for self-regulation. Well, Stephen, can we start with some clarity on what self-regulation or emotional regulation
Dr. Knighton is on.
I got you. Let me slow down and break it down for you. It's the ability to exert control over one's emotional state It's the ability to calm yourself down when you're upset and cheer yourself up when you're down. It's really about managing disruptive impulses and emotions. And this is important because as mature individuals, we ought to have the ability to face emotional, social, and cognitive threats with some patience and some thoughtfulness. And yes, I can see your faces to this phone, and you're saying to yourself, Stephen, that sounds good. But in the heat of the moment, I don't know if that's actually possible. Well, let me help you get there. As you develop in the area of self-regulation, you reach a point where you're able to take a pause between your feelings and your actions. And it's in that pause that has saved me so many times, Santita. In that pause, you'll think things through, make a plan, and sometimes wait things out patiently. You'll be able to do this because your focus will shift from your feelings to your deepest values. You'll have that overarching long-term goal at the forefront of your mind, and that'll keep you from losing your mind from time to time. And when we don't adequately manage our disruptive impulses and emotions, we're often left to deal with anger, anxiety, fear, or harm that's been done to relationships, to people, because of an overreaction and unnecessary suffering. It's in its most basic form, self-regulation allows us to bounce back from failure and remain calm under pressure. So how do we control our emotions? Stephen's helped me because I'm going to work today, and there's some people there that kind of get under my skin. Gotcha. Let me help you. While there are many ways to influence one's emotional state for the better, emotional regulation often involves reducing the intensity of our emotions. That's what you got to do. Reduce the intensity. That can happen through reappraisal, where you change how you think about something that prompted the emotion, or the other option is suppression, pushing emotional thoughts or feelings out of your mind, knowing that there's some greater consequences at stake. And so you've got to recognize that everyone has a choice in how they respond to situations. Again, we can attack, we can avoid, or we can approach. Your feelings may sway you towards one, but you are more than your feelings. Say it again. You are more than your feelings. Before you get out the car and go into that office, I am more than my feelings. I want you to start restoring balance by focusing on your deeply held values rather than those transient emotions. You got to see beyond the moment, and you got to see the bigger picture as you calm down.
I love it because you know what? You got a lot of road rage. You see, everybody's ready to get cranked up. And it's got to stop.
Yes.
I mean, it's just like, well, what are you doing? I mean, okay, they cut you off. Next, what are you really upset about? All right, and look, since you're driving the car, don't put me in that. Hello,
That's right.
Please don't put me in that. Yeah, go off. If you're gonna do that, do it by yourself. Don't do it with me. Oh,
Get me out of here.
Get me out of here. I mean, because people are on edge because there's just a lot going on. People are being pushed to their limits. That's why. Not having the basic needs of human beings met is a dangerous thing. And the powers that be know that, and you can't manage that. Eventually, as my mother says, you can't help me without helping yourself. You can't hurt me without hurting yourself. Eventually, everybody's going to feel the pain that the least of these feel. I love you, Pastor. How can we worship with you on Sunday, and how can we be with you on Friday?
Friday, Facebook Live, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can just type in my name in that search bar, Stephen Thurston. That's Stephen with a PH. You'll see my picture come up. I've got on my Moroccan gear there. And you'll know it's me. Click that page and come on and hang out with me. And if you miss it, it's always saved, so you can always go back and catch it in my feed. And then Sunday morning, 9 a.m., New Covenant Baptist Church, Chicago. You can catch it on our stream, on our YouTube page, on our Facebook page, or even in person if you're in the Chicago area. And guess what? I don't hold you long. 9 o'clock start time, about 10:15, everybody's walking out the door. So you can enjoy the balance of your day. Get in, get out, catch brunch, sit on the rooftop, enjoy your Sunday.
I love it. I love it. I think because we grew up in church, we get it. Sending you so much love. New Covenant Missionary Baptist Church. I love your mother and father and your siblings. Give everybody my love today. Please.
I'll do it.
Please,
I'll do
please,
it.
please, having been in service for almost a century, this family has. We've got Dr. Shanina Knighton, registered nurse, and of course, infection preventionist. How are you doing, Dr. Knighton? What's on your mind today?
Good morning, Santita. How are you?
It's great hearing your voice.
Good. So honestly, I really don't have an agenda for Tuesday, but I guess we're going to call it Transformation Tuesday.
How about that?
And just in me thinking, yeah, and just thinking about prevention being better than treatment. I know that this is something that we talk about all the time, but I don't think like we really dig into it deep in terms of what that means. And the one thing that resonated recently, and it's funny as I'm on my wellness walk with my sisters, is that long story short, if you don't make time for your wellness, you'll be forced to make time for your illness. And we all continue to hear this often in regards to people having to stop because their blood pressure may have been increased. And that being, let's say, the outcome measure, right? Or my blood pressure decreased being the outcome measure. But I was just sitting here talking about process measures. And a process measure is something that you are doing in order to be able to get to the outcome. So meaning maybe today I'm only going to consume this amount of sodium. And then it's that process measure that will then get to that outcome measure. Same thing when we're talking about infection prevention and control. I understand that visibly we cannot see things such as germs. But we know that they exist based off of if we get sick or not. But it's really almost like rolling the dice when you're not doing all of those process measures to make sure that you are decreasing your risk. Meaning, are you making sure that you're eating an optimal diet that's going to keep your immune system boosted? Are you making sure that you're getting adequate rest to make sure that your cells are replenishing and can fight off infections? Are you making sure that you're cleaning your hands? Are you making sure that you're cleaning your environment? Are you making sure that you are staying from around people that are ill or are prone to illness? So these, again, are all process measures that does determine the risk that is associated with you getting sick or not. Right now, I don't know if you've seen the news, but there has been an increase in COVID cases this summer, the same way that there are increases in other respiratory illnesses. It's still floating around us. While yes, the outcome measure is not that it's visibly in the news all the time, the process is making sure that we don't become one of those statistics by making sure that we're constantly doing these preventative measures so we don't have to see the outbreak, so we don't have to see the issues that are amongst us when we're talking about these viruses.
You know what? I think it's really important that we change the baseline. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about what you've been saying. You've been saying, hey, wait a minute. We have normalized sickness. Now we need to normalize wellness. That's a change in consciousness, everybody. Think about it. That's a change in consciousness where being well is the norm, not being sick. We have moved into a place where being sick is the norm in our world, and particularly in American society. We have pills for everything, but we don't take food for wellness, right? I got less than a minute for you.
And all that I would want to say in this end is think about it. Instead of imagining how good you'll feel after the illness, imagine how good you'll feel not being ill at all.
How about that? All right, everybody. Hey, Dr. Nina, HEYDRNINA, she's out doing, practicing what she's preaching, her morning walk, everybody. My aunt does that too. She's 77. She looks like she's a good 50. She takes care of that body, everybody, and it takes care of her. Sending you so much love today. Dr. Shanina Knighton, everybody.
Thank you.
Of course, sending you so much love. Everybody, hey, I want you to call me at 773-763-9278. Let us talk about the forgiveness of the African debt, more than $20 billion. Russia is forgiving that debt. What does it mean? What are the strings attached? No one asked that about the IMF or the World Bank. They never forgive these debts. And these countries never come out of debt. Back in just a minute on the Santita Jackson Show. Hey.
Santita, you were saying who? Listen, I'm sorry, I was listening, but I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said Russia is forgiving somebody's debt?
African countries' debt, yeah. They did that with Cuba as well. They did that with Cuba.
That's because they got that new currency.
Well, BRICS, all that. We need to look at what's happening in the world. And, several of my friends who hate Russia, and I was telling one of my dearest friends, I said, I hear you. I said, but you have to understand, African nations have a different relationship with Russia. And I've spent so much time overseas, and I have so many friends who are from outside of the United States, that the conversation that I don't have a Euro-centered conversation, and most of us do.
Right.
I have a global conversation, and I have a conversation that is also weighted by, I have an African baseline. I have an Asian baseline. I have an Indian baseline. I'm like, no, I don't see the world from
But
Europe
as you should.
Yeah.
But as you should, and always tell people, and that's just a problem. Somebody will follow something or follow somebody, not liking somebody, and they don't even know why. And you missing out potentially on knowing the details or knowing stuff that could be life-changing because you've already dismissed it based off of somebody else's opinion.
Wait a minute, which suits their agenda and not yours.
Exactly.
What are you talking about? No, honey, that I hear you, but that's not working for me. How about that piece?
Absolutely.
So when I look at, that's why I had the position. I've had the position on Ukraine that I've had. Everybody doesn't see NATO the way many Europeans or Euro-centered societies see NATO. Everybody doesn't see the United States that same way. There's a book that just came out that I'm going to get that says that no one has killed more people thank you so much, in the modern era than America. You got to deal with that because that is the perception around the world. Professor Okwete, how are you?
I am fine, Ms. Jackson. It's such a pleasure and a privilege, and thank you for having me back. How are you?
It's wonderful to have you on. I'm just doing a little bit of housekeeping. And Alex, I'm going to send you a text right now. And I've got Dr. Shanina Knighton on who wanted to hear what you have to say. So you can say hello to her.
Hello, doctor.
How are you, doctor?
I am fine. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise. So I'm just listening in and learning.
Attorney Patello's on.
Learning. Okay. I learned so much, so I'm always ready to come and learn.
Yes, absolutely.
30 seconds.
Oh, you got my...
and I feel, Santita, this might be the most quality news that I might get out of the week. So sometimes I have to stick around a little bit.
Well, I'm glad about that. Should be able to get more of it, though.
10 seconds.
I'm sending you a number that I need you to call now. So, hey, Robert, how you doing?
I'm outstanding. How are you?
It's great hearing your voice.
The same.
And you've got Professor Okwete on with us right now, so stand by.
Hello, Robert.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's wonderful to be
10 seconds.
You.
Same here. The pleasure is mutual.
Stand by.
Okay, we're coming up.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world. I am
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. We're going to be talking about Sinead O'Connor with John Nichols in the next hour. And what's happening in Georgia? They're getting ready for something. It looks like former President Trump might be indicted, but he is still winning in that Republican contest. I'll be talking about that at the top of the hour, but I have a feeling this conversation might go a little longer. Russia has forgiven more than $20 billion in debt to Africa. What does that mean? Africa and African nations and the global South, India, Asian nations, most of the world, which is where most of the natural resources are, the wealth of the world is housed in these nations, and no group of nations houses more natural wealth than Africa. Well, the World Bank and the IMF, Western institutions from the United States and Europe, they give us loans. They give loans to the global South, and they can never get out of debt. And the leaders who want to get them out of debt mysteriously just don't make it. That has been the story for just decades upon decades upon decades, as African nations and the global South have sought sovereignty. So it is tremendously important that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, as he's seeking allies, as he is looking at the Ukrainian conflict, and as he's looking at the world continue to reorganize itself, as BRICS nations become more prominent economically, socially, culturally. He has recently announced the cancellation of more than $20 billion in debt to African nations. And I went not just to the BBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post. I went to a newspaper that comes out of Ghana. You know, I think it's important for us to hear different perspectives, everybody. And this op-ed piece by Joel Savage was, why did Russia forgive $20 billion of debt to Africa? What happened, everybody? What generally happens? He wrote Africa, and to a lesser extent, Asia and Latin America's obligations to the Soviet Union were forgiven by Russia. Moscow showered money on allies and governments throughout the Cold War, typically only asking for political allegiance in exchange. Third world, that is global South nations that indicated a desire to pursue socialism and supported the USSR, were the principal beneficiaries of Soviet financial and military assistance. So what's going to happen now? We saw Russia forgive much of Cuba's debt after it was found that Cuba is now, there is a huge tranche of oil that was found more than 10 years ago off the coast. It was really one of the 20 largest findings of oil in the world. They will be joining OPEC eventually. And I said, I think we're going to figure out how to reopen the door to Cuba. And that is what we have been doing. It is about the money, everybody. So I want you to call me at 773-763-9278, 773-763-WCPT. And let's talk about this. I want to know what your thoughts are. I want to hear how you feel about it, or even if you know about it, is it important to you? Of course, we've got attorney Robert Patillo, Rainbow Push, WAOK, and of course, you can see him doing commentary on news all over the world, and indeed, one of the world's preeminent experts on Africa, Professor Niakwete. You've heard him on this show before. Ghanaian-born American. He's an analyst, an activist, and founder of Democracy and Conflict Research Institute. Met him many years ago when he was with Trans-Africa. So let me start with you, Professor Niakwete. What do you make of the forgiveness of this more than $20 billion in loans? We've not seen the World Bank or the IMF do anything like that. What do you make of this? Is this a cause for rejoicing, or should we be cautious?
I think,
Mr. McKeeson,
I will marry those two key words, cautious rejoicing, because the context and the details matter very much. And of course, in the title you have why is Russia doing this? It seems to me there are two sets of reasons, two boxes, two categories of reasons. What are Russia's reasons for doing this? And what are the African countries' reasons for embracing this? And there is a global context. So I think for me, yes, it is a good thing when you don't have to, when some of your debts are forgiven. There's no question that it's a good thing. The next question becomes, why is this being done? I was raised to think even when you are very thirsty and somebody is giving you water, you need to make sure that it is water they are giving you, and you need to make sure why they are giving you the water, what they hope to get out of it, because we live in a very dangerous world. The world has been dangerous for a long time. So for African countries, yes, they because they are indebted, and you are so right, Africa's resources have been taken over and over and over, and precisely because those who are taking it, who go to Africa to take it, have more power, more military power, more control over violence. So even though they're still Africa's resources, when the dust settles, they say, well, you owe us this money, you owe us that money. So for some of those monies to be forgiven, it's a good thing. And by the way, the World Bank, the IMF, the United States, the Western nations, and other global powers, they've forgiven debt before. In fact, there was a name given to it called HIPIC, highly indebted poor countries who were forgiving their debts about 15, 20 years ago by mostly the Western countries. So we've had this, this is another instance. So for the Africans, yes, anytime our loans, debts will be forgiven, that's a good thing. Why is Russia doing it? Well, you know, there is another term also called the scramble for Africa, which is, again, when these powerful countries go into Africa to grab the resources. And for an American audience, the context is so important. They started what was called the first scramble for Africa, happened in the 1800s, after 1884, 1885, when they met in Berlin. The European countries, the U.S. was an observer, enslaved people in the United States. My heroes had ended slavery. So the Europeans were forced to do other things, and they invented machines, burned all these warming gases, and then needed more inputs and where to put all these outputs. And they went into Africa and grabbed Africa, which is why some African countries, like where I was born, speak English, others speak French. So that was the first scramble. What is going on now is we have the second scramble. They are now going, as you said, because the wealth is still, a lot of wealth is still in Africa, they are going. So I'm saying many countries are competing. The difference in this second scramble is that you have African countries, which, yes, again, they are not as strong as they should be, but they are stronger than before. So now it's not a matter of just sending in armies, although some of that is being done to just take it. You have to seem like, oh, okay, they invited us in there. So it's a race to win on the surface, friends and allies. So I am saying Russia also has its own interest. The things it wants to accomplish. It wants the Africans to like them and say, okay, yes, we are your friends. And it so happens that a lot of global decisions are now being made in the United Nations. And Africa has 55 votes in the United Nations General Assembly. So if the Africans see you as their friend, you are going to win some global debates, global decisions, like the fight over the Ukraine war. So that's another reason why Russia is doing it. And of course, if you forgive out of gratitude, you might then have more leeway in taking more of the resources. So there are reasons Russia is doing it. There are reasons that the Africans are accepting it. But for me, as somebody born in Africa who sees myself as very much an African, I'm wondering, what must we do to make sure we get a better bargain out of these important global events that are happening? First of all, we have to keep our eyes open. We have to understand why people are coming to us. Anybody coming to Africa, the first thing we have to know is they are not here They are not in Africa for charity. They want something. They are trying to fish us. I come from a fishing family, and I know you offer a big fish, a little fish, and it thinks that it's having a free lunch. It's not a free lunch. So we Africans must know there are no free lunches. Anybody giving us anything has a hook inside. We must understand at the end of the day, we must get what we need while they're taking our wealth that they need. So Russia definitely is offering debt forgiveness, which is a good thing, but Russia has things it wants to accomplish, and I don't want Africans to say, oh, Russia is this wonderful charity-driven country which is here to help us. No, they go into Africa to help themselves. People will know the Russian government does it. They also have an organization called the Wagner Group, which is involved in the war in Ukraine, but it's in Africa, in Libya, Central Africa Republic. They are in Mali. There have been deaths attributed to them. So it's a complicated situation, and I want Africans to keep their eyes open. And the debt announcement has been the debt forgiveness has been announced. We also know that when we deal with powerful countries, sometimes they make announcements, but they don't follow up with the actual action. They'll say, oh, we'll give you this money. And 5 years later, they'll come and say, oh, we'll give you this money. And when you look at it, they have not delivered the monies they promised.
Sure.
So for me, it is caution, keep your eyes open. But if everything announced goes through, it will be good. Africa will get some benefit from it. But we have to know Russia is not doing it out of damage. In fact, it is out of just altruism. It is out to improve its image in the world because the Ukraine war has isolated Russia. That's the other reason, and it is looking for allies. And as I mentioned, much of it is depending on votes in the United Nations, and there are 55 African votes. The times that the votes have been taken, majority of the Africans have voted to condemn what Russia is doing. A minority has not. So the debt that they have forgiven, they are forgiving for those who seem to lean their way. But it is a good thing, but the context is important.
Well, and the context is important because, America does the same thing. The Western nations do the same thing. I mean, Africa has to really, really embrace, and I want to bring Robert into this because this is the way this is business, right? I mean, and the thing is, while Russia has been in isolation, they haven't been as isolated because Africa would not get on the West side. So it is very, very complex, I think. Robert Patillo, what do you make of this debt forgiveness? Because I've not seen the IMF and the World Bank make similar moves.
Well, extending the analogy about fishing, often if you're a fish and you see some free food floating around, you have to make sure it's not attached to a hook. And this is a hook for the Russians. If we go back several weeks, Russia ended the Ukraine grain deal. As you know, Ukraine is a breadbasket, not just of Europe, but for much of the world. Outside of the United States of America, much of the world's agricultural products of barley, wheat, corn, etc., are grown in that northern European plains area, that being Ukraine and into Russia. That grain is exported primarily to Africa to deal with areas of food insecurity, particularly in the northern Sahara region. So places like Egypt, Libya, Sudan, etc., are very dependent on grain coming from Ukraine and from Russia in order to meet the nutritional needs of their people. Because Russia pulled out of the grain deal, they are seeking to gain a strategic advantage over the Ukrainians and force them into surrender because they currently have a naval blockade around much of the port of Odessa, which prevents even humanitarian and agricultural and commerce-based traffic from entering and exiting Ukraine. Their goal is to shut that off and force Ukraine into either surrender or to force the people to revolt against them. Now, as shrapnel from this, as an unintended consequence, many African nations, which had previously been neutral with regards to Russia's actions, had begun criticizing them because their nations were now being punished ostensibly for the actions in Ukraine as an effort to punish Ukraine by cutting off their ability to export grain. They are making it very difficult for African nations to feed their populations, and they risk as Dr. Quete said, they risk a revolt against them, both in the United Nations and also in the other deals. As was mentioned, the Wagner Group, one of the promises made to Prigozhin after he marched on Moscow was that he would be able to keep his Wagner Group in Africa. Well, the African nations still threatened to kick the Wagner Group out because the grain had been cut off, because that's a more pressing need they have. So Putin had to come hand in hand to the Africans, to the African nations and African leadership, one, offering free grain to those nations to make up the stopgap. So not only is he saying that that he's going to replace the grain that you were buying previously, I'm going to give it to you completely for free. That is massive. That is a tremendous geopolitical move, because once you take away the economic pressures of trying to finance the importation of grain to feed a populace, well, now you can free that money up either for, in best case scenarios, infrastructure, housing, medics, and education. In the worst case scenario, for more military weaponry to arm yourself against your enemies on the continent. As a result of this, and in addition to the billions of dollars in debt relief, we're seeing more African nations now standing up to Western nations. After the revolution in Niger this week, for example, we've seen the new interim government cutting off uranium supplies to France and cutting off gold shipments to France, for example. The reason this is significant in this geopolitical game around Europe is, well, European nations in large part have been able to survive not having Russian natural gas for power and for heating through the use of nuclear power. So if now you have the Niger cutting off your access to uranium, well, now you don't have nuclear power either. And you combine that with Russia no longer providing natural gas, well, now how does France get through the winter? So when I say that these are chess pieces moving on a board and each one has a second move behind it, what we're saying is that Russia's trying their best to pressure Europe from all angles to push Ukraine to the negotiating table. As was said, this loan forgiveness, it sounds good on paper, but we have to make sure that there are not strings tied to it. And also, this has to be a challenge to the Western nations of France and Great Britain and the Dutch, the colonial powers, the Spanish, to forgive colonial debt or repay colonial debt to nations they had previously oppressed. France, for example, forgive and repay the colonial debt paid by Haiti, paid by Martinique, paid by many of their African possessions. And that would change the entire economic and political outlook of those nations. So this is going to be the place where African leadership has to stand up and now go to the table, go to the UN and say, well, you see what Russia is doing. You want us to be on your side. We need you to forgive our colonial debt also and repay what we have paid. I think that is what will really be the revolutionary point that can move the ball forward on developing nations ascending to that quote-unquote developed status.
So where do you see all of this going? Professor Okwete, I've got a couple of minutes for you and then a couple of minutes for Robert Patillo. I mean, do you think that this will, because I think that America is Mr. Grand Opportunity to renegotiate their relationships, not just the United States, but the West. You know, when Reverend got his Legion of Honor, his distinction, that designation, the highest award that can be given to a civilian by the French, he kept asking President Macron about Haiti. He said, Reverend, is there anything I can do for you? He delayed the ceremony by like 90 minutes, which was unheard of. And he said, and Reverend kept saying to him, Haiti, you must make things right with Haiti. And the president was stumped, actually. And he looked at Reverend and he said, you really have a heart for the poor. He said, President Macron, if you want to do anything for me, make things right with Haiti. European powers still have not done that with their former colonized states. So where do you see this going? 90 seconds for you, Professor Okwete.
Yes, thank you very much. And of course, I love what Robert said. I agree with everything. Where is this going? I guess 3 words: to be continued, because this is not the end of all the things that Robert linked them to it. I agree with, and I'm so glad that Reverend said that to President Macron, because to be blunt with you, I don't trust Macron and I don't trust the French. And I'm so glad. Of course, Haiti is back in the news. I'm sure, your radar is so vast and sensitive that you've heard that now they want police force to go into Haiti, and the Kenyans, of all people, have stepped forward and said that they will lead it. It's still going worked out. So yes, the problem in Haiti, today is, if I'm not mistaken, Liberation Day in Barbados.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the whole slavery thing and the whole reparations thing. So it is to be continued. Now, the only thing I want to add quickly is that, this debt forgiveness was announced because Russia had its own summit with African countries, and the Western media have loved to say, well, only 17 heads of state showed up, unlike the last time when over 40 showed up. Well, in December, the United States also had its own, President Biden had its own Africa summit here in Washington, D.C., where I'm speaking from, and about 40 some African heads of state, almost 50, showed up, and the U.S. also made its promise, and a big chunk of the promise was $55 billion with a B investment in Africa over the next 3 years, and they put a veteran American diplomat, Johnny Carson, in charge to make sure, because some of us in Washington have been saying we want to make sure that whatever you promise is followed through. It's not just words, it's not just a piece of paper that gets thrown out. And Johnny Carson, in fact, I learned that is a native of Chicago later when I was talking with him. So the Americans have also made their own promise. And I must say, in defense of the devil, about 20 or 15 years ago, the IMF and the World Bank being pushed by a lot of Africans, one of whom was then President Obasanjo of Nigeria. They pushed hard for the debt to be forgiven for Africans. So, and it was also done under George Bush. So now there is a big highway in Ghana built by Nkrumah, but it was renamed the George Bush Highway by the then Ghanaian president. So the West has also tried to do this.
Which frankly made me go, are you serious right now?
Yes. And the final piece is,
hold on. You hear the music. That means I got to run. But on the other side, Robert, I want you to give us a closing thought. And I mean, Dwight McKee wanted to hear this conversation. Maybe you have something to say as well. So let's talk about this and what's happening in Georgia with Trump. I know you've got some thoughts because you've actually interacted with Fonnie Willis, attorney Robert Patillo, of course, every Sunday on WAOK radio. You can hear him from 1 to 4 Eastern Standard Time. You don't want to miss it. It is a great show. As they say, buck wild. I love it. Professor Nia Kwete and Dwight McKee, and then John Nichols will be talking to Sinead O'Connor in the next hour. Stay right here, everybody. Please like and share the show. All my morning stars, like and share the show. Like and share. That's right, Carol Soskin, Laura, Linear Bob, Tracy. Everybody like and share. 773-763-9278, 773-763. WCPT, more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. And some people are saying that they're glad to hear the truth about Russia. The fact is, nobody has gone into Africa just altruistically. But the fact is, Russia, when you go to Cuba, and my grandmother used to work there as a child, as a migrant worker.
I see.
Okay, so when the first time I went to Havana, she told me when you get to Havana, you go to Hotel Havana, and you're going to walk down this street. When you walk in, you're going to see this. And she was absolutely right. My grandmother chopped sugar cane and picked beans. So I have,
wow.
so I have another, my mother went to Cuba as a child because as people who were from South Florida, as poor Black people from South Florida, you hopped on the boat and you did seasonal or day work or week's work. So that's my background.
Yes.
I have one background from my father. I have another background from my mother.
I take off my hat to you so much and to your mom. I just wanted to slip in this.
Well, no, just
point
if you could just let me finish this. So that informs that just you have to understand that, and Jack Odell, who President Kennedy told Dr. King to fire because of his so-called socialist and communist ties, one of the architects of foreign policy for the civil rights movement, and he was our first international affairs director. So when I look at Russia and I look at and I compare and contrast them with the European powers, that informs my thoughts. But I know we're bringing up Dwight to talk about Trump, but I'm sure he has something to say about this when we get on the air. But I didn't want to interrupt you, Professor Dr. Okwete.
Yes, I just want to slip in and let to say the soldiers who are overthrowing government in Africa, especially West Africa. Now it's happened in Niger, it happened in Burkina Faso, it happened in Mali, it happened in Guinea. These are all within 2 hours of where I was born. So these are very important to me. And Ghana itself has had a series of tools. I don't trust the soldiers. They take the gun and they say, we are governing you. People say, well, we see the people in the streets celebrating. And I say, no, they are dancing because guns are being held to their head. Those who want to rule must ask the people for verifiable votes. Please don't trust any coup you hear in Africa.
Ever.
This is a very strong point. Now, the fact that they've cut off they are talking about the uranium that France has been stealing from Niger. I say amen to that because Niger should be as rich as Saudi Arabia is. Uranium is even more important as a source of energy and weapons than oil. But France has been stealing it forever from Niger. So I'm very happy about that. But I don't trust the soldiers. They are doing it and they will kill or disappear anybody. If I were in Niger now or in any of those African countries run by soldiers, I would not be able to come on this radio station because I will be disappeared. My family will be disappeared. So please don't trust the soldiers.
Well, yeah, but you never can. But you never can in war.
Uniform.
Everybody's vulnerable when they're occupied, right? I mean, that's part of the power of the story of Jesus, because Jesus lived under occupation. And so women are vulnerable to being sexually abused, raped, violated, and men are too. But I think that, as we look at Russia with suspicion, we don't look at America through the same lens, even though America and Western European nations have raped Africa for centuries. That's why we have these borders that we have now. And I'm just saying, I hope that we do that, because one of the things that the Soviets have done, that the Russians have done, not the Soviets, the Russians have done, which was a mistake which was something to their credit. They came in with a different set of relationships. And so you have many African leaders who say they didn't treat us as cruelly as France, as the United Kingdom, as the United States, as Belgium, as the Netherlands, they say that today. And so
they do, which is true. Yeah. Which is true, but trust nobody. Just because they didn't abuse you in the past doesn't mean they might not. It kind of says the same thing, but Santita, I hope in our discussions of the air, you and I have agreed that, hey, the operating principle should be trust nobody.
Trust nobody, but also, Professor, call everybody out, because people are suspicious of Russia automatically without questioning what America is still doing. All of our Firestone rubber is coming out of Africa for nothing. And we need to deal with that. Well, Firestone has become, their generational wealth will not end for a millennium because of what they've been able to steal from Africa. And I just think it's awful that we are not looking at what the Western nations are, like Niger is still being raped. I mean, Haiti is still being raped by France. And nobody's calling
yes.
out France. When Sarkozy went there after the earthquake, they booed him out. He had to leave because the Haitians would not tolerate him being there. You remember that?
And I talked with you about how Reverend got the award in France and the additional details. My heart sank because, as I said, I don't trust Macron. He talks from both sides of his
Well,
mouth.
he's a banker,
he will say,
right? He's
yes.
he's a Rothschild banker. So
yeah, so I'm so glad that Reverend inhabits spoke truth to power, because I said, oh my God, I hope he's not trying to dangle something in front of the Reverend.
Wait a minute, wait. Let me say this. You can't give Reverend anything. Reverend's still on assignment from Dr. King, okay? And he got the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It doesn't mean that he supports imperialism. And Tracy, America has been imperialist. And that's why I bring America into this, because they're all in it. Check your history.
Yes, they
read how Europe underdeveloped Africa. When you read these books and when you talk to these people and know the history, then you can talk to me. I'm talking about how Africa can get on its feet and stop being raped by everybody. That's it. Stand by, everybody. We're going to come in. Dwight, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, stand by. I hope we get a chance to talk about Trump, but maybe we will, maybe we won't. I don't know. Stand by.
10 seconds.
Stand by. We're coming in.
Stand by.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. It's Tuesday, August 1st, 2023. I'm hearing some feedback, I think, from one of my guests. So make sure you're not listening to the radio or anything and you're not on speaker. Call me at 773-763-9278. Alex, please look into that. 773-763-WCPT and AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Call us at 773-763-9278. And of course, meet my morning stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. I don't know what I'm hearing. This sound is a little irritating. I'm getting feedback. I don't know if are any of my guests on speaker?
I communicated that to them on the
Let's
talk
just
back.
make sure. Okay. So let's just get that. Okay. Now we've eliminated that. That's fantastic. Hey, everybody, let's talk. We've been talking about Africa and the debt forgiveness from Russia. What does that mean? America has done some of that, but the IMF, no. The World Bank, no. These Western entities, and Margaret Thatcher said, "Look, we have Europe on both sides of the ocean." She was talking about Canada, the United States, and the United States. So, what does all of this mean? And then, what is going to happen with former President Trump in Georgia? Fani Willis, it appears, is getting ready to indict him and his team. So, what's going to happen there? And then, of course, Sinead O'Connor talking about her brilliant career, but more than that, the role of an artist in society. She felt it was to lift, it was to enlighten, and it was to take the positions on truth, whatever the consequences. And so we thank God for the life of Sinead O'Connor. We're going to be talking about her at the bottom of the hour with John Nichols. Let's get some of these headlines out the way. The endless heat wave in the southern U.S. will continue this week. You'll see it in Dallas and Houston and New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. It's getting hotter, everybody. Donald Trump's fundraising committees are burning through cash. Although they have raised $53.9 million over the first 6 months of the year, they spent more than $52 million. Apparently, they have about $4 million in cash in one of the PACs. Wow. Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens, the actor who played him, has passed on, 70 years of age, everybody. More than 20 Emmys. He won several himself. Bless his heart. Had been battling cancer for more than 6 years. Made his transition today. He was just 70 years of age. Angus Cloud, the Euphoria actor, who played the kind-hearted high school drug dealer on the HBO show Euphoria, made his transition. We don't quite know what happened, but people do suspect that something that he might have harmed himself. He buried his father last week and apparently was completely bereft. Praying for him. He'd been struggling with his mental health, according to his family. The U.S. narrowly advanced to the knockout stage of the Women's World Cup, everybody. They tied 0-0 with Portugal in New Zealand. It was enough to secure second place in Group E. Boy, getting to that three-peat is not going to be easy for our sisters over at the FIFO World Cup for the women, everybody. In Chicago, we're going to have a high of 80 degrees, partly cloudy. Minneapolis, St. Paul, 87 degrees, partly cloudy. The Netherlands, 7. Vietnam, nothing. And today, China and England will be playing, and Haiti will be facing off against Denmark. In Major League Baseball, the Twins will be meeting the Cardinals. The White Sox will be meeting the Rangers, and Cincinnati defeated very narrowly the Cubs 6-5 yesterday, and the Lynx in the WNBA will be playing the Sun. Everybody, we've been talking about financial independence, which is kind of what this segment is about too, as we're looking at Africa and just really being free. If you want to own a home, it is within your grasp, everybody. If you owned a home 4 years ago, but you haven't owned one within the past 3 years, you might be in luck. If you have not owned a home over the past 3 years, you need to call Team Hochberg at 855-56-DAVID. 855-56-DAVID, your trusted local lender. First-time home buyers made up only 26% of the market last year, down from 34% the year before, and the numbers have been much higher over the years. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have been very alarmed by this because they do know that home ownership is the cornerstone of Americans' wealth. And so what they want to do is turn these numbers around by incentivizing first-time home buyers by dropping these lower mortgage rates. Now, this program can change at any time when the mortgage rates rise, and doubtless they will, but today they're still lowered. So if you live in the Chicago area and the total household income in your home, if the heads of your household make $105,000 or $700 or less, you might be able to get into this program. I mean, you might have 2 heads of the household, you might have 3, I don't know, but you need to call 855-56-DAVID, 855-56-DAVID, and find out. Now, you can go to 56david.com. I love going online, and I think that that's important. It gives you the option of really reading what the outlines of this program are, but call them too. Let them know not only if you want to be a part of this program, you might have trouble holding on to your home. That might be an issue for you. So call them at 855-56-DAVID. They are prepared to take all your questions about home ownership. 855-56-DAVID. You might qualify for this amazingly low program from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and let Team Hochberg guide you through. We're not making this up, everybody. Multi-generational wealth can be yours. So let's do that. Do that for yourself, do it for your children, do it for your grandchildren. Because if you're a homeowner, more than likely your children will be, and your grandchildren, and on and on and on. So everybody, let's make things right. Let us move into home ownership with Team Hochberg. 855-56-DAVID, 855-56-DAVID. We've been talking with, indeed, the leading African expert. And I'm not exaggerating. I met him with TransAfrica many, many decades ago when I was in college. But we're so honored to have Professor Niakwete with us. And of course, Attorney Robert Patillo from Rainbow Push and WAOK. Of course, you can see him internationally giving commentary. And WAOK, 1 to 4 Eastern Standard Time every Sunday. But Dwight McKee is joining us as well. And, before I go back to my panelist, Dwight, did you want to jump in and say anything before as we pivot to a couple of other topics?
Yeah, I certainly did.
You have a caller.
I think now is the ideal time for us to stop seeing ourselves as Black Americans and begin to see ourselves as Africans in America, and understand ourselves as part of the diaspora. What has happened historically is we've isolated ourselves to think that slavery is a United States phenomenon. And the fact of the matter is, so we concentrate more on the Emancipation Proclamation than we do on the Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna, it was worldwide, basically European-driven situation where these countries came together and divided the African world among themselves. The Emancipation Proclamation was a situation where the slaves, those who were held in slavery in the United States, were somehow freed from their bondage. Well, the fact of the matter is that at this time in history, our leverage is being able to lock ourselves into the domains of the African countries that now have leverage on the international stage because they have the natural resources that we don't have or control. But we do have relationships and influences with them. And together, if we come together and bring our politics and our strategic position in the United States together with their influence and control of the natural resources, then we can force European concessions to them, and they can help force United States concessions to us. And so things like restoration and reparations become very real because now it's in the United States' self-interest as a world power to have to negotiate with us in order to pacify them. So I think there's be a whole rethinking of a paradigm of who we are and where we fit on the world stage.
Well, I think that's been
our
part
African
of.
brothers now have a leverage.
Yeah, they do. I mean, I think that's part of the reason that just in Reverend Jackson's travels, because he really he's very American, but he's also quite global. He said, no, you need to understand that this is a global struggle and you are African Americans. We're the only people who have been absolutely separated from the continent. When you get on a plane, Professor Akwete and Robert Patillo and Dwight McKee, you've had the experience. When you get on the plane as a Black person, the planes are 99% white and they want to know what you're doing going to Africa. No, I mean, they they go back and forth, and it is so profoundly insulting to me because I'm like, you're asking me what I'm doing going back to my homeland, and they find a way, and I can count like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I know now they're going to be able to get to me while I'm going to the restroom. I'm just standing up to stretch my legs, something like that. And
Second caller.
and then getting to Africa is cost prohibitive, which I think is problematic. But before I go back to you, Professor, and to you, Robert Patillo and Dwight McKee, because we have people who are calling in about this. Okay, I go with you, everybody. Brian from Joliet. Brian, what's on your mind, sweetie?
Oh, good morning, Santita.
Hey.
I find, as always, your show is very enlightening and important. I wanted to just say that I just wanted to the gentleman who I think said that Russia, in regards to this, I hope peace breaks out real soon, but in relation to the war, Russia is not exactly isolated because according to a report, if it's true, last week, China and Russia had joint naval exercises. So if China and Russia are getting pushed closer together, I would hardly call that. I think that it's a very dangerous situation. And if these reports are true, that Moscow is getting blasted by these drones, and if the objective is to remove Vladimir Putin, who is a really bad person, it's a major roll of the dice because you might, if you're lucky, get a Gorbachev, or you can do worse and get a Stalin. And if that's the case, a country with 6,000 nuclear weapons with an incredibly maniacal leader like a Stalin, not a Gorbachev, well, turn out the lights, the party's over.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you look at Truman as maniacal? I mean, he was asked not to drop, he was told that he shouldn't drop the atom bomb, and he did it twice.
Oh, my view of that was he should not have dropped the nuclear weapons.
No, I'm just saying, do you see him as someone who was a little unhinged, a little unbalanced when he was told what the atom bomb would do, right? And if you started this, we'd never be able to end it, or the likelihood would be great. Do you see him as someone, because you talked about Stalin and we've talked about all these leaders who we have been told are very dangerous, but we never look at our own who do things that are very dangerous, Brian. And I'm just wondering, do you feel the same way about
I'm
Truman?
well aware.
Oh, I know
Excuse
you're
me.
aware. That's why I'm asking. Yeah.
I'm well aware that when they first figure out how to use the atomic bomb, they weren't sure if it was going to destroy the entire planet.
So my question then, before I go to the next caller, is, do you see Truman in that same group of people who are dangerous? It's just a question.
Well, I would say that in my opinion, and it would take a lot longer to explain it.
Sure.
No, we didn't have to drop the 2 nuclear weapons on Japan. It could have been solved in a different fashion just by using a blockade at the end, and other weapons, conventional, were actually killing more Japanese than did the 2 nuclear weapons. So that set a really terrible precedent. As far as I'm talking about today, we are in a very dangerous position with whoever is going to be in charge in Moscow of getting into an all-out nuclear war, and I hope peace breaks out real soon.
I hope we break it out. I'm sending you so much love. Absolutely. Let me go to Ron from Michigan. Ron, what's on your mind, sweetie?
Good morning, Santita. I want to talk about Russia, but you got my cackles up here. Okay. My father served 3 years in the Pacific during World War II, 4 Bronze Battle Stars. He would have been the tip of the spear, okay, into the Pacific, into Japan. Harold Washington served in the Pacific also. Probably Harold Washington would not have survived that war either, because the Japanese were not going to surrender. I don't care how many fire bombings we did. They were going to fight on the beaches with bamboo sticks. Their children were going to fight us. It would have cost over 1 million American soldiers. Anybody who says that they should not have dropped the atomic bomb, they did not have any kinfolk fighting in the Pacific. Plain and simple.
But that wasn't
God bless the atomic bomb.
But
God bless the atomic bomb.
Okay, because that wasn't my question. He made an assertion about leadership, that I've heard made often. And my question was merely, do you feel the same way about President Truman, who had been asked by Einstein, Oppenheimer, and others who created these destructive weapons, please don't use it. Don't use it. I mean, they regretted it once they came up with it. And so that was my only question, but I wanted to get your thoughts today. Because both of my grandfathers, for the record, served in the Second World War, and my grandfather was also, he was the one who told me that Black soldiers were sent into the death camps to rescue Jewish survivors, but many of his friends were blown up because they sent Black people in there because Black people would be recognized by the Jewish survivors as not being Nazis, and because they were laden with landmines. And so the Black soldiers were expendable. They would get killed first, and many of them died rescuing Jewish survivors. But your comment.
Also in the Pacific, Santita,
absolutely,
Black Marines were not allowed to fight until the white Marines were so badly shot up and killed. Then they welcomed the Black Marines and they cheered them on, and they loved them just like they were white Marines. Okay, when they were shedding their blood.
I got you. But please.
Now this point on Russia, if I may. Now this point on Russia. Russia, if we remember the 80s, and Cuba, they sent weapons, tanks. Cuba sent soldiers to fight against the apartheid regimes. All of Western Europe, okay? Almost every one of those Western powers, France, they had colonial power, they had colonies in Africa. And Russia sent their soldiers, and Cuba sent their soldiers to defeat white supremacy, and the United States and NATO in Africa. And I do not think that the Africans have forgotten that, okay?
They haven't.
I'm just so frustrated with this here nonstop war, rush to war with Ukraine. Everything for Ukraine to war. South Africa, it's not in the best shape, but that's because the apartheid regime left it that way. But Russia and South Africa were also conducting naval maneuvers. So because not everybody is on board with this shit. And they, like I said, Africa remembers the colonial powers of Europe and how they sucked the wealth out of Africa. And Russia's no angel, okay? They got their whatever brigade, black diamonds, but they're a recent problem in Russia. The Western powers have been there for centuries, okay? And their rule still stinks and is still causing problems in Africa and the world. Thank you for letting me blow off some steam, Santita.
Of course,
Thank
sweetie.
you.
And hey, just stay calm because we need you for the fight, okay, sweetie?
God bless you, Santita. I'm great.
God bless you. Well, a lot of people are very, very interested in this, Robert Patillo. Why do you think? I've only got about 5 minutes left in this segment, but a couple minutes for you, Robert.
Well, the reason is because these conversations aren't taking place in mainstream media. A lot of people, this is the first time they are hearing about these things. You know, you have to follow, Hunter Biden's friend said something to somebody, and then there has to be 24-hour coverage on every major network about that. Like, I don't give a damn about Hunter Biden's friend, but that's what the mainstream media is talking about. I think when you understand what is really going on geopolitically around the world, it changes your perspective. There's this effect that astronauts talk about, that the first time you go to space, you look down and you see the globe from space. You see there's no lines, there's no borders, there's no differences, landmass, country to country. These are just things we've made up that it changes think. And I think that often, when we media forget that when we expose people to these ideas, when we allow them to see things basically from orbit and see the global situation, it changes the way you think, it changes the way you interact. Then when we're looking at what's going on with loan forgiveness in Africa, then one, it challenges the Western powers. What are you going to do? It also challenges America to say, well, if Russia can forgive hundreds of billions of dollars in loans to Africa, what are you going to do about the Africans that you enslaved here in America that you have never done anything to make whole or to make right? And this is the fear that I think the Western powers have, that when you have African nations now partnering with Russia, partnering with China, partnering with India, partnering with the Middle Eastern states, no longer being the Sally Struthers going over to save the children for 35 cents a day, but building multi-billion-dollar and trillion-dollar infrastructure projects. We're seeing China starting to forgive debt on the Belt and Road Initiative for many of the things that they've invested in over the course of the last decade. I've told people continuously the second half of this century will be the African century, that the youngest population in the world is on the African continent. The natural resources of the world are on the African continent. The oldest DNA in the world is on the African continent. And I think the Western powers understand this and try and position themselves to be able to survive in that new world.
Well, stay right there. I'm going to get closing thoughts from you, Professor Forte and Dwight McKee, as we look at the life and the legacy of Sinead O'Connor. That's very, 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 very important. When you look at the role of the artist in society, Dwight McKee, she lived it. She lived it. And she lived it at peril to her career. She said, but the record industry doesn't matter as much as humanity matters to me. Justice. And I just love that woman, had so much admiration for her. And as she bore the pain herself, ended up singing a song made famous by Mahalia Jackson, Troubles of the World. And she took that in tribute to Mahalia Jackson and dedicated it to Black Lives Matter. Got to talk about her because her life matters, her legacy matters, and we need to know what it is. But I got to get some closing thoughts from Dwight McKee, from you, Professor Okoite, and as we welcome John Nichols to the show. He never knows what he's coming into, Alex. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in just a minute. Everybody keep talking because we are on Facebook Live and YouTube and we're on several different platforms. But Professor Okoite, now I'm going to have you speak when we get back on the air. But is there anything you'd like to say, Dwight? First, you, Professor. Is there anything that you'd like to react to?
Well, I guess my reaction is that I agree with everything that has been said. I mean, this may sound like a cliche, but I really mean it because I think, okay, I should have money to make that point. But it's a vast issue. In fact, one of the points being, look, this is a global phenomenon. It's a global struggle. So, of course, we have to pay attention to the local where we live, but we have to link it with what is
Mr. Nichols is on
everywhere. And so I just love those points. And yes, Russia is doing what it is doing because it wants to protect its interest. Everybody has interest. Yes, and the European countries and the United States, they have abused Africa. They still abuse Africa. What I would add there, though, is we must remember that when the United States has abused Africa and Black people have not kept quiet. Black people have spoken up. Even if you are taking the narrow view of just African Americans, you have no idea how inspired Africans have been by what African Americans have done. I was born before 1957 when Ghana became independent. So I was born into the British Empire. I remember March 5, the night of March 5, Dr. King was in Accra. And I cried when later he came back and said in Harlem that he was so inspired by seeing Nkrumah and his colleagues take over from the British and say, we are going to govern ourselves. So there are so many aspects to it, and this is a joint struggle. And I have to tell you, I think I will surprise you by saying I want to find the time to listen to the piece on Sinead O'Connor because, of course, I did not know a lot about her. I knew just the name, but when I'm now reading some of the things that she did, how she spoke up against the crimes committed by the Catholic Church, how she pushed and fought. And I said, oh my goodness, I should have paid more attention to this woman because it's all about fighting oppression and injustice all over the world.
Absolutely. And I mean, but when I just knowing that she was from Ireland and understanding the politics of where she was from in Ireland. And I just said, okay, I understand her politics. I really understood her. John Nichols, welcome to the show. Everybody's still here. We've been talking about Russia forgiving this $20+ billion in debt forgiveness. But so I'm letting them close, but they want to hear you talk about Sinead O'Connor, which I think is important.
1 minute.
I appreciate that. Both pieces of that equation. That sounds fabulous, and I'm already listening in a bit to the wise words of my fellow guests.
Well, everyone, this is, of course, there's Professor Dr. Nia Kwete, Dwight McKee, your newfound friend and brother beloved, and Robert Patillo.
A good group indeed.
Of course, I watch John all the time, so I am so excited I can barely speak. Now I can actually say, look, I heard him on the radio on the same radio show, so I'm all ears. I wanna learn. I teach Santita that she calls me professor, but I'm actually, my real title is the student.
10 seconds.
Stand by.
I feel the same way, Professor, and I'm honored to be with you.
Stand by.
Stand by, everybody. We're coming up.
We can change the world, change the world, change the world. We can change the world, we can change the world, change the world.
This is the Santita Jackson Show.
War and hate to a place of love, it's not too late. Gotta save the children, we can't wait. Let's change the world.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show. We've been talking about, so many of you are so interested in this discussion about Africa and Russia and debt forgiveness with Professor Nia Kwete, brilliant African specialist from Trans-Africa and professor at some of the major universities all around the country, including George Washington University in Washington, D.C., Dwight McKee, social scientist, dean of the Mafa Redemption Project here in Chicago, and of course, WAOK radio host in Atlanta, and you've seen him all over international media, giving political commentary from Rainbow Push, the national leadership team there, attorney Robert Patillo, and of course, we welcome John Nichols. John Nichols, begging your indulgence, I wanted to give my guest final thoughts as they listen to you talk about this wonderful legacy of Sinead O'Connor. Indeed, Professor Kwete said that let me not put words in your mouth. You said you wanted to wait and hear about Sinead O'Connor. Why, Professor Akwete?
Well, because since she passed, unfortunately, of course, I mean, I'm addicted to music, so her name, was recognizable to me, but I did not understand her significance. I'm afraid to, I'm sorry to confess that her fight against injustice, particularly what the Catholic Church has done and her criticism of the Pope, I did not know enough of that. So I am scrambling to say I need to learn more. So, of course, I mean, it is an amazing luck on my part that I get to learn that from someone who is an even better professor than me, Mr. Nichols.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we love Sinead O'Connor, and I'm so glad that you want to bring some light to her life today, because I think that is so important, that we know who she was, who she is, and who she always will be. This great, great, great freedom fighter who used the arts as artists are supposed to do. She used the arts to enlighten and to lift. But let me get some closing thoughts. And of course, John, you can weigh in on this African debt forgiveness. Dwight McKee, your final thought about this, please. Of course, this is not going to be the last time we have this conversation, because we got to bring Professor Forte back to talk about what's happening in Niger. And we'll do that before the week is out. So, Dwight McKee, in a minute.
Well, one thing that Ms. O'Connor demonstrates is the balancedness of race in this international struggle. Is that race has been used as a weapon to separate those who have been oppressed from other non-Black people who also been oppressed. That oppression has been beyond color. It's based more in convenience. And so the British did to the Irish what many white Americans did to us. And so when Sinead O'Connor protested everything that the British was doing to the Irish, and protested what the Catholic Church had done to the children, many children, she became an enemy of the state, the same state that Dr. King became an enemy of, in many ways. And who understood that better than anybody was Paul Robeson. And so Paul Robeson understood that this was an international struggle between the righteous and the unrighteous, between people who had power and people who didn't have power. And so as he became more international at another level, so much so that he understood 21 languages, then so he could speak in everybody's language of oppression, he became the most dangerous man in the world. And so we have to develop that line of thinking for ourselves, to see ourselves as more internationalists than, patriots, because the struggle has been an international struggle and the oppression has been an international oppression. And Sinead O'Connor understood that. She should be one of the patron saints of the civil rights movement, along with Rosa Parks.
Indeed, she is to me. And indeed, you opened up, Professor Corte and Robert Patillo, please stay, because I'd love for you to make comments. But I want to get to John Nichols. You said Sinead O'Connor always knew that Black Lives Matter. Indeed, you open up this fantastic essay that I've already tweeted out. You said Sinead O'Connor explained the point of her career in her 2021 memoir, Everyone Wants a Pop Star. See, but I am a protest singer. She said, I am a protest singer in the tradition of a Paul Robeson, in the tradition of Odetta, in the tradition of Harry Belafonte, in the tradition of Dick Gregory, who left Dwight McKee. We knew him, one of the most lucrative careers. He was the breakthrough comic. He paved the way for Bill Cosby. And for all the people you see today, Richard Pryor, Dick Gregory was that guy. And so you said the backlash after she tore up the Pope's picture, and I remember that, but I said, I hear what she's doing. I'm no disrespect to anyone, but she said, look, she said to the Grammys in 1991, at the peak of her fame, she said, I object to the false and destructive materialistic values of the recording industry that As artists, I believe our function is to express the feelings of the human race, to always speak the truth and never keep it hidden, even though we are operating in a world which does not like the sound of truth. Wow. John Nichols, who was Sinead O'Connor?
Well, I think a lot of people who are listening know Sinead O'Connor by her songs because they are still played on radio. And in fact, maybe more so now after her death. But she was a very young Irish woman who had immense talent. And she was discovered, when she was in her teens, really, and quickly made a couple of albums which turned out to be international hits. She became such a star that when she was still, I think to many people's eyes, looked like a teenager. She was a little bit older than that, was performing on all the greatest stages around the world. And then it famously in 1992, when she had already, had number one hit singles, was selling millions of records, was invited to go on Saturday Night Live. And famously, she did not perform one of her own songs. She performed Bob Marley's song, War. And she took the liberty, I think Bob Marley would have approved, of reworking a couple of the lyrics to address child abuse. And to say that until child abuse is reckoned with, that there is a war, there is a violence in our world that we need to focus on. And then she took a picture of the current Pope at that time and tore that picture up on stage. That created an international outcry. People were furious. She was banned from NBC, and her career was shaken at a level that most artists probably would not survive. But she was not repentant on that. She was not apologetic. She had believed that it was necessary to use her forum to talk about child abuse and abuse within the Catholic Church. And at the time, that issue was not a central issue. It is today. It's much discussed, and people are very conscious of it. But at that time, they weren't. And she was willing to risk her own career in that moment, and did in many senses. Now, what's incredible about it is that wasn't the only instance. That happened to be very high profile, and people were very conscious of it. But again and again, even before that moment, she risked her career to take stands on issues that other people weren't paying attention to. And be it the rights of Palestinians, be it Middle East peace, be it opposing the war in Iraq, be it standing up for women's rights in Ireland, be it standing up for human rights around the world. Again and again and again, she did this. And one of the things I focused on was her deep commitment to addressing systemic racism. And that came very early in her career. When she had her first success, she moved to London and lived in a mixed-race neighborhood in London.
Wait a minute, which is huge. Let us establish that in London. That's a big deal.
And it was that she lived in Hackney or near Hackney. And while she was there was an incident where a couple of young kids, 13, 14-year-old, I believe, were riding a moped, and they were chased by the police, who assumed that these kids had stolen the moped. The kids got scared, and in the course of the chase, the moped crashed, and one of the children died. I believe his name was Nicholas Bramble. And Sinead O'Connor was shaken by this incident and by the police chasing these kids. And she became a student, if you will, of police violence in London against Black men. And she wrote a song called Black Boys on Mopeds. And it was it remains to this day, one of the most powerful indictments of systemic racism and of the failure of leaders to speak out against police violence. And she started performing that in 1990, 30 years before George Floyd was murdered. And throughout her career, again and again and again, she went back to these issues. She stood up to the Grammys the Grammy Awards and objected at a point when she was one of the stars of the moment, objected to their failure to respect hip hop and rap music, and was so loud and outspoken on this issue that when she died, and she died last week at the age of 56, when she died, the members of Public Enemy, the pioneering rap group, honored her and sent out messages about how she had stood with them when others did not. And so she did go on to have a career. In Ireland and in England, she remained a reasonably successful artist. In the United States, she was a little bit written out of history and not paid that much attention. But when she died last week at age 56, there, I think, was this great reckoning and this great realization that here was this woman who had risked her own career again and again and again for civil rights, for human rights, for racial justice, and had invariably, again and again and again, been right to do so and had done so before others did. And so I think we remember her as one of those rare and remarkable artists who did not see herself as a commercial entity, as a commercial striver, but rather saw herself as someone who had great talent, gift of God, and used that talent to speak truth to power. Rare is such an artist, but you're right to make the comparison with someone like a Paul Robeson, someone like a Harry Belafonte, or any number of other artists.
Oh,
and
Detta.
The interesting thing about her was
Dick Gregory.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, but Woody Guthrie. I mean, you know that you have some people. I mean, and you, quite frankly, you see. I see Willie Nelson. I mean, I see Chris Christopherson. I see some people who don't do the popular thing necessarily. I mean, and you
Can I
recall,
tell you a Willie Nelson story?
Oh, please, because
Tell
you know
you
we
Willie
saw him
Nelson?
come out for Reverend, which was not a popular thing to do.
Oh yeah, out of the blue, right? You didn't even have the app.
No.
But that's Willie Nelson, who's always right on so many issues. But there's a great story of Willie Nelson and Sinead O'Connor. After she had been very outspoken on some of these issues, the two of them were appearing together at a show or at some benefit performance of some kind. And Sinead O'Connor came on and she was booed by the audience. I mean, it's really a kind of a rough moment because so much of the media had turned people against her and frankly tried to portray her outspoken stances in favor of economic and social and racial justice as somehow crazy or something. And Willie Nelson, backstage when she came off the stage, took her aside and, embraced her and said, "Look, why don't we go tomorrow and come to the recording studio? Let's record some songs together." And she and Willie Nelson did indeed record songs together. And famously, that was, one of those rare redemptive moments where maybe she wasn't being treated well by the media, but one of the greatest artists of all time saw her talent and respected her.
We're talking with John Nichols about the life, the legacy of Sinead O'Connor. I mean, a great freedom fighter, someone, she used her art, not just entertain. Entertainment tickles. She used her art to enlighten and to touch you and to make us better. She wrote, and I loved your essay. I thought it was just really, this essay that you've written about her is just so large because it really touches upon her life. She wrote, "Thousands of children are starving every day. Children are being beaten up because of problems in society. Children are being sexually abused and emotionally abused. People are living in the streets." She wrote this in this 1991 letter to the Grammys. She said, "It's not enough anymore to just sit in your chair and say it's terrible. Musicians are in a position to help heal this sickness, but I'd say 90% of the artists in the music business fail in that responsibility." And it helps me to think of the role of the artist in society. Of course, you remember that famous essay, really helping to push us into, because being an artist, having a musical talent, having some kind of any other artistic talent, it's a gift. And she used her platform to illuminate who we are and to show us where we ought to be and where we need to go. What can we take
Mm-hmm.
away from her? I mean, because she did so much. I mean, the Black Boys on Mopeds. I remember when the song came out. I said, "Well, she's really not trying to have this big career, but I love it." I mean, I left her for it.
Yeah. But there's a lot that we can do. And first and foremost, we're doing it right now. We're remembering her and talking about her. That's important because, as you know, Santita, I read a lot of history. And one of the things I try to do when I write about history, sometimes distant history, is to recognize that at a time when too many historians and too many people in the current moment try to make excuses, right? There were people in the past who knew how to do the right thing. Tom Paine stood up against slavery at the founding of the American experiment when others refused to do so. And so we talk about Tom Paine because he did the right thing when others did not. You know, and you just keep going throughout history and talking about folks those rare individuals who stood up and did the right thing early on. And what benefits us all is if we remember that, and especially when someone passes, when we lose someone, as we have Sinead O'Connor, to remember that she did the right thing at times when it was not beneficial to her. She's not alone. There's other artists who have. But when we celebrate those who did stand up, who did take risks, then we begin to, I think, empower people in the current moment, right? And make people see, okay, it may be hard, but it's right to take the right stand. It's right to do the right thing. So I think there's this teaching moment there that's very, very important. There's other things we can do. Sinead O'Connor, in the later years of her life, continued to record, continued to be a very respected artist, especially in Ireland and some other parts of the world. And when George Floyd was murdered by the Minneapolis police, she recorded a version of one of Mahalia Jackson's songs, and it was rather successful. And she donated all the earnings that she had from that to the Black Lives Matter movement. She continued to be supportive of causes, not merely verbally, not merely in her art, but also, you know, with contributions. The other thing she often did was perform wearing a T-shirt from Amnesty International, seeking to highlight human rights abuses around the world, and she spoke about them. And so I think that those of us who have a few resources might be inclined to donate a bit of money, a bit of what we've got, to one of the causes that she stood up for, and maybe even do so with a mention of her name. That's something that I try to do often when we lose great figures. And you and I, Santita, we've lost a lot of great heroes. We're talking about one. The list is long, and you know, I think our friend Steve Cobble, you know, and the Serious Policy Studies set up a fund to train young activists in the tradition of Steve Cobble, and I give money to that because it's, you know, he's someone that I want to see more of in the future. And so there are many, many ways that we can honor folks. But I guess I'll close off the suggestion simply by saying that I really invite people to go back and listen to the song Black Boys on Mopeds. Yeah. It's now a 33-year-old song. It's from a very long time ago. And yet, while she's calling out Margaret Thatcher and the leaders of Britain at that time, I think that if you change the names, it resonates just as powerfully today.
Let me ask you this. I mean, because I think many people would be surprised, just given the politics of the United States. Many people don't realize when you get to the UK and you see where the fight between the Irish and the Crown. It's a very, very real thing. And you saw in this movie, The Commitments, their deep resonance with the Black community. And they say, you know, in fact, we're the Blacks of Europe. And you saw that, I mean, and that was something her management team absolutely refused to play up in terms of her politics. The fact that she conflated systemic racism with, as an Irish woman, because we would just see her as a white woman. She said, no. She said, I am spiritually and just actually I'm in the same position as Black people. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think she was a little, I would be a little cautious and say that I think she recognized some of the deeper oppression that Blacks have experienced because of the color of their skin. And she was conscious that there are many forms of oppression, and some take on a fundamental brutality that we have to be conscious of. But you are right that she noted, in fact, in speeches and essays and in things that she wrote, that when she was in Britain, as an example, when there was a petty crime, right? The two types of folks who were suspects were mentioned in the newspapers: Blacks and Irish. And she pointed out that they could literally say it was a black burglar or it was an Irish burglar, but they wouldn't say it was a British burglar, right? They wouldn't say it was a white, British burglar or something like that. And so I think that she did make those connections, and she wasn't alone in doing that, by the way. There has been at the best over time, there have been many instances of folks who have suffered oppression and who have recognized the oppression of others. And that's a really vital thing. There's a wonderful story, maybe wonderful, maybe terrifying and sad. But there's a story from Ireland about how during the potato famine in the 1840s, which was a brutal act by the British government to starve the Irish people, literally starve them, and failed them on so many levels, that Native American tribes in the United States sent money to Ireland. Native peoples, indigenous peoples in the United States heard about people starving in Ireland and sent money to help the Irish. And now today there are many traditions in Ireland of supporting Native struggles in the United States. So it's a multi-century connection that was made. And I think that this is one of the things that we need to understand. If we look back in history, we will find that imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, many forms of power have oppressed peoples, and they have oppressed many peoples in many places, in many circumstances, on the basis of race and ethnicity and class. And once you understand that and look back in history and realize that, the most powerful response to it is to look at oppression today and to say, okay, maybe my circumstances gotten a little better. Maybe, my people are not as oppressed as they once were, but who's being oppressed today? And where should we speak up in this moment? And I think Sinead O'Connor, that resonated deeply in her. I think it shook her. I think it was very difficult for her. I think she did have a lot of struggles personally, because felt she lived in a world that was unjust, and she felt an incredible call to speak up against that injustice.
And indeed, she had been abused herself. She had been abused.
Yeah, she had suffered.
And she used that experience not to stay stuck in it, although she did struggle throughout her life. She used it to resonate, I think, John, with other people who've been abused, people who lived under the boot. Indeed, the green from the Black Liberation flag comes from the Irish. And I think she just comes from that tradition. The last minute belongs to you, John Nichols.
I'm so honored that we've taken the time to speak today, do so about these issues, but also to do so in the context of talking about Africa, which we have. I would just mention that there were many instances in Sinead O'Connor's life where she spoke up about she was in Africa. She was a passionate fan of Nelson Mandela and the struggle against apartheid, and an advocate for it. So we should make all these connections and recognize that there is an arc of justice, an arc of history that bends toward justice, as we've been told many times. And I think it's good that we honor Sinead O'Connor as a part of that arc.
Amen. Indeed, that is what the artist is supposed to do. We're supposed to show who we are. We're supposed to show who we can be and show us the way to go. Love you, Sinead O'Connor. Long may you live. Love you, John Nichols, best-selling author of, along with Bernie Sanders, what is it? It's okay to be angry about capitalism. It's okay. Get that book, everybody. Continue to keep it the bestseller that it is. I love you, everybody. Can't wait to be with you. Going to get closing thoughts from my panel in just a couple of minutes right here on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. I love you, everybody. God bless you. Have a great day. Does anyone have anything they want to say, Professor Okwete?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Nichols. I see you on another show, Amy Goodman, and I scour the air for you. So, and I haven't been disappointed. Thank you. I mean, I have a lot of heroes, but I'm also selective, and my one acid test is freedom fighter or not. So to know that Sinead O'Connor was such a big freedom fighter, I'm ashamed I didn't know about it. When I hear about her struggles, you know, I worked for Randall Robinson 11 years. He just passed, but he remained my friend and mentor for 42 years. And one of his sayings was, no good deed goes unpunished. And I realized this is sort of the thing that happens globally. And so anyway, thank you very much, Professor Nichols.
Absolutely. Robert Patillo?
Right now, France is evacuating their embassy in Niger. The Italians have also announced they will be sending flights today to get their citizens out of Niger. Burkina Faso and also Mali have said that there is any military intervention to try to remove the current revolutionary government, that they will consider it an act of war. And they are actually protesting in the streets saying, long live Russia and long live Putin. France is panicking because they need that uranium in order to survive. So we're going to monitor the situation.
Well, you know what? I invite you right now. You'll get a text from me later. We need to talk about why Niger matters. So, Robert, let me know if you have any time tomorrow. Professor Okwete, let me know if you have any time tomorrow. I think it's something we need to, you know, this show needs to pursue it. I mean, and John, if you ever want to weigh in on that, please let me know, because this is global. Because everybody on earth is touched by uranium, John.
That's right. And look, I think it's important that I'm appreciative that we've valued the legacy of Sinead O'Connor today and the very kind work of the professor who should never be apologetic for not knowing about someone, because those of us who write about stuff, we like to introduce people to heroes and to the freedom fighters and to others who stood up over time. So the professor honors me greatly by his interest and his engagement. It's wonderful. But I think that if Sinead O'Connor was with us, and I would never try to speak for another, but I think in this case it's fair to say that she would be turning this discussion away from herself and toward Niger, toward issues around the world. There are so many. It can be overwhelming at times. It can be overwhelming to look around the world and see, you know, all of the horrible things that are happening, and scary things and overwhelming things. And I would just tell you that, you know, in many religious traditions, in many biblical and Abrahamic traditions, we are told that the truth will set you free. And sometimes the truth can be very overwhelming. It can be very unsettling. But what is freeing is to learn about issues, to learn about subjects of concern, and to see that as an argument for stepping up and speaking out. And I think that the great value of what you've done today is, we've honored an artist, but we've also focused on circumstances around the world that artist would tell us we should be focused on. And so I appreciate it.
No, I thank you for having the sensitivity, and the sensibility to write about her, but to say, you know what, I think we need to talk about her today, because people are not saying enough. People concentrate Dwight McKee on Professor Okwete. You are, and I agree with you, John. You shouldn't apologize for not knowing about her, because the corporate media is not going to lift up someone who's not a corporatist, right? She refused to be owned. She said, no, this gift that I have comes from God, and I'm going to use it to glorify God's people. And I'm going to stand with the least of these, and I'm going to lift them up. You're going to know who experienced apartheid throughout the world. You're going to know them through me. This little platform that I've got, such as I have, I will give it. And whatever happens with it is fine. And now we're talking about her. She died July 26th. We will be talking about Sinead O'Connor into the future, because it is those good works that she did that will live forever. Not necessarily your hit record on the Billboard Hot 100. Dwight McKee, were you about to say something?
Well, I think the operative word with Sinead O'Connor was humanitarian.
Mm-hmm.
Humanitarian is somebody who has a sense of they're human beings who are sensitive to the plight of other human beings, and humane about the plight of other human beings. And that's beyond race, that's beyond class. That goes to the existential nature of just people, good people who are sensitive and operate in a sense of love and empathy. And she, more than as much as anybody else, reflects that sensitivity that exists beyond class, race, gender. It is at a human level. She was a great humanitarian. And John, I want to thank you for doing the report on her.
She was first a human being. She was first that, and she wanted us to connect to each other as human beings and as children of God. And I thank God for her, and I thank you, John. I can't thank you enough for speaking to her and for helping to keep her alive, because she's someone for whom I've always had tremendous admiration. And I, maybe because I've just known so many people who were willing to make that sacrifice, and I was raised by two of them. They said, no, the presidency is great, but you know what's greater is the mission that Dr. King sent us on, and we have an assignment. And my father and mother said, and we're going to fulfill that assignment. And they've never turned away, John. They said, we are here to set the captive free. We're going to speak on behalf of the poor. Those who live under the boot of oppression, who have to live with it, we will fight for them. And in the highest levels of power, we will not forget to fight for you. That's why, Professor Coite, Reverend can get the Legion of Honor. He can get the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He just got the highest award that Columbia can give, and on and on and on and on. That is nice, and he is appreciative, but he doesn't get excited. The thanks he gets.
That is me. That is wonderful.
I mean, it's just, and guess what? My mother, who is a freedom fighter, who's actually a little further ahead than he is, she would never let him or us, her children, get excited. Dwight, you're a living witness to that. Don't get excited about
Absolutely.
this. Now, would you tell him who my mother is, Dwight?
Yeah, she's that and all of that. She is a firecracker for justice and is as insightful as anybody I've ever been around as you deal with, as she looks at the landscape. And again, operates out of the humanitarian tradition, because oppression to her is oppression anywhere is a sin and a vice that has to be confronted. And she's a woman of great integrity. Absolutely. And ended up marrying a man of great integrity. And really, in many ways, making him more relevant based on her sense of integrity and righteousness.
And so I appreciate that. I mean, if I got up and sang some songs that were meaningless and that were insulting, that's why when people giving India Ari a hard time about calling out some Black artists, some Black women who have tremendous profiles, who are very popular today, she said, no, you all going down the wrong path. Because we have to lift women up. We have to lift womankind up, and we have to be sensitive to how Black women have been perceived. A Black man has never had rights that a white man's been bound to respect. Well, a Black woman's never had a virtue that anyone's been bound to respect. So how dare you come on a stage and be projected as a whore? How dare you be projected as someone who has no virtue? How dare you do that? You insult C. Dolores Tucker. You insult Shirley Chisholm. You insult Rosa Parks. You insult Sojourner Truth. You insult Phyllis Wheatley. You insult. Shame on you. Shame on you. You don't have the right to do that. Diana Ross and the Supremes had to fight to be viewed as ladies. There's a wonderful anecdote that Mary Wilson, God rest her soul, who I knew, because these people I've known, I've been so blessed to know them, John and Professor Coite and Dwight and Robert. She said, we were very excited to go meet the Beatles. And this was like in 64, 65. They were the two of the biggest groups in the world. So they said they got up, they had their little mink coats on and their fabulous outfits. And their mother, one of their chaperones was Diana Ross's mother, because they had chaperones because they didn't want their daughters or these girls to be in any mess. So they get to the hotel and the Beatles are in various states of undress. Dwight and John and Professor Coite and Robert. Why were they undressed? Because they were going to have some hip black girls who were going to come over. They were going to have a good time. And they were shocked to see these women dressed to the nines and ladies. You think about that. So when Reverend Jackson goes after Mick Jagger, when he's talking about some girls, European girls like to do this, Puerto Ricans girls like to do that, but black girls like to F all night. That's where that's coming from. Brown sugar, just like a black girl should. Are you serious? No. And you got to call that out. And you don't use the gift that God has given you to diminish anyone. You use it to lift. Whether you're a writer, a painter, a sculptor, a dancer, a singer, a composer, whatever. If you are a teacher, if you are a mother, if you are a father, whatever ministry God has given you, and we all have one, at least one, use it to lift somebody. Please. Use it. Use it. Don't abuse it. Does anyone else have anything? Is there anything that we've left unsaid today?
Well, I just want to chime in and thank you again. I'm glad to be part of the conversation
tomorrow
on what has happened in Niger, because I think it has many facets. I am 90% sure I'll be able to do it. I just need to check and see if that my doctor's appointment tomorrow comes later in the day. So I would love to do it, because I think that
and let us know.
Needs to be seen properly.
And Robert, let me know if you can join in, because I think we need to talk about this tomorrow. We need to understand, because now African nations and they're becoming as prominent in American news as European nations' news are becoming, because America is having to renegotiate how they relate to Africa and to India. India is about to be the second largest economy on earth. Things are changing.
And Santita, if I might, I want to thank you again, because, for 3 months, there's been an atrocious, all wars are atrocious, but what has been happening in Sudan is just, it leaves me speechless. And the coverage of it, I think, in the United States and in Europe is even worse. And so what you are saying, which is true, that they are beginning to cover it some more, even their so-called experts, they leave so much out, they get so much wrong. I sit in my place fuming and say, okay, I need to find time to reach out and write. So it would be good to discuss Niger, which is just one country away, shares a border with Chad, which shares a border with Sudan, and the war in Sudan is blowing back horribly into Chad. And Chad itself has been in trouble for a long time. So yes, we must talk about it, but I have to tell you, the coverage this year of the Sudan war and now of Niger, as a professor, I would tell you the coverage gets an F from me.
Well, it should, but the fact is, remember, I told you, as we talked about at the beginning, as we go, this coverage is not altruistic. It's because now, first of all, for most Americans, Africa is a country, which is not true. It's a continent with about 50 plus countries in it, at least 55. It is also because we are trying to figure out how to get in there and get their resources, how to we're trying to figure out that relationship now, because we need them in another way. And demanding that we relate to them another way. Lula is demanding that we relate to Brazil another way. Brazil is the blackest country outside of Africa. More black people were sent to South and Central America than were brought to the United States. So the world is demanding that they be related to very differently by the European powers. And America is one of those powers. So we need to look at that. We need to look at that. So we're going to be talking about Niger at 6:30 tomorrow morning and 7:30 in the morning. I can't wait to be with all of you. I love being with you every day. And I just thank you for listening to us. John Nichols, you want to close us out?
I will. I'll do my best because there's so much good thought and so much good energy here. It's renewing to be with all of you folks, and I think that we are renewed by music as well. And I know this is apropos of nothing, but I recall not long ago being on a program with Danny Glover and Bernie Sanders, and we started out talking about Eugene Victor Debs and other folks. But we ended up at the close of our conversation spending most of our time talking about Paul Robeson. And I think that somehow, in the overall scheme of things, the artists who speak up and show us what we can do and what we can say give us great inspiration. And so my counsel to folks today is go and dust off a Paul Robeson album or a Sinead O'Connor album and listen to something good, and then be inspired by that to go out in the world and address injustice in Africa or India or the Middle East or right here in the United States, because there's plenty of work to do.
Plenty of work to do. Well, thank you. Keep going back to the music. What did the Isley Brothers say? We've got work to do. We have got work to
That's
do.
right.
Oh my goodness.
Well, yeah.
I got a job, baby. I got work to do. We've got work to do. We've got work to do. So I love you all, everybody. And I love you, John. I love you, Professor Okwete. I love you, Robert. I love you, Dwight. I love you, Alex. Thank you for a great show. Boy, he's always twisting knobs and running in between studios. And I thank Alex Castaneda for such a wonderful show always, every day. Calls me about 5:30 or so just to make sure that the run sheet is tight and right. And I just thank him for all the work that he does. I love you, everybody. God bless you. I will see you. Please like and share the show.
We love you so much.
Oh, I love you. And I thank you. And I just thank God for the opportunity. I thank WCPT and AM 950 Radio and other stations that are beginning to pick us up. I thank you for the opportunity to be here every day. It's a blessing and it's a gift. And I don't take it for granted. And I don't take you for granted. And the questions that you ask when you call in, the fact that you're listening, that's really, that's the payoff for me, that we're bringing something to you that you really need and that you want. But more than that, is something that you need, and that what you need is something that you do want. And I'm appreciative of that. And I hear you. I love you, everybody. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. Have a great day. Carol Saskin, my sister from another mister. Love you, girl. Love all of you. D. Ray, Angela, Susan, Linear, Bob. Oh my goodness. Let me just try and roll through. D. Ray, Robert, Kenneth, Susan Garner, Daphne, Laura. Let me see, Barbara Bacon. Let me see, TJ, Obadiah, Chapearl, Louie Chewy. Let me see. So Angela, Kenneth, sending you all so much love. Robert, and who do I have here at first? So many of you came on in. Larnell, Lorraine, just sending you all so much love. I want to acknowledge at least a few of you. Joyce, Monique, and what is it? Yeah, so many of you, so many of you. I want to thank you all, my morning stars. I love you, everybody. And God bless you. Have a great one, everybody. Like and share the show. Hope you had a great one today. God bless everybody. Love you.